In Berkeley, I'm Dennis Bernstein. You're listening to Flashpoints on Pacifica Radio. Well, I am sure you have heard by now the Trump administration has announced dramatic changes to the rules on detaining migrant families and children. The new rules allow officials to detain families for an indefinite period of time until they are granted asylum or deported. These changes significantly undercut the Flores Agreement, rules established by the federal government to protect migrant children and families. The rules say that children should not be held for longer than 20 days in immigration detention and establish certain basic protections for the treatment of the kids in government custody, protections that have been exposed as sorely lacking at the U.S. facilities all over the Southwest. Joining us to talk about this is somebody who knows a great deal of what it means to be essentially locked away, put in a concentration camp with your entire family. Joining us is Satsuki Ina. She was born in the Tule Lake Segregation Center. That's a maximum security concentration camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. She is the co-leader of the Tsuru For Solidarity and has a private psychotherapy practice in San Francisco, specializing in the treatment of community trauma. She is also the producer of the film From a Silk Cocoon, Then They Came for Us. We thank you for coming back and joining us. We know you are concerned. You're very active on this. Give us a sense, say a little bit more about your background and what draws you into the middle of this fight now.
Well, I was a child incarcerated with my family for 4.5 years. My father was taken from us, and so we suffered family separation. We suffered indefinite detention. And as a psychotherapist, I consider indefinite detention a form of brutal torture. My family and other people who were children in the camps, Japanese Americans who were children in the camps, have suffered lifelong traumatic consequences of being imprisoned with no idea where and how long we were going to be held behind barbed wires. So as a professional, I am in great fear about the consequences that these children are going to suffer now with the threat of indefinite detention and also the possibility that there will be no required certification for the adequate care for these children.
You've witnessed already, you've met with some of these families, and you've witnessed this suffering and this slow torture, if you will, already. What do you have in mind now? What do you think needs to be done? What is the responsibility that we all hold in terms of what's happening here?
Well, first of all, we definitely have to speak out and show up and protest and do what we can to speak with legislators and people in positions that could convey to the general public, the atrocity that's being committed right now, and do what we can to protect these children. We cannot let this kind of arbitrary decisions made in a democracy. This is brutal and inhumane, and I think every one of us who knows what it means to be a child needs to do whatever we can to protect these children.
Well, why don't you, before we let you go, why don't you give us a sense of your understanding of what it means to be treated like this, what the impact, the lifelong impact that it has to be taken this way. I'm thinking about all the different things that happen. All of a sudden, the child is cut off from their parents, and they're depending on prison officials for food. This changes every aspect of life. You want to talk about the long-term impacts?
Sure. I have met with these children and mothers inside of the Carnes detention facility in South Texas, and those children that I met with had only been incarcerated for 3 or 4 months and were already exhibiting severe signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And when there's a chronic state of stress, the stress hormones are released on a continual basis. There's no relief from it, and that kind of situation actually alters the nervous system of the child, making them hypervigilant, prone to anxiety and depression, forever feeling unlovable, and internalizing the way in which their captors are treating and viewing them, withholding basic essentials for their, well-being is a message that's conveyed to a child who has no other way of thinking about themselves except the people who have control and who have authority. It is an atrocity that is happening today.
What are you suggesting? What are you planning to do in the next days and weeks in terms of resisting this attempt to further criminalize the family life of really mostly brown people fleeing violence and wars, oftentimes stimulated by U.S. foreign policy? What do you recommend?
Well, ultimately, the children and legal asylum seekers need to be treated in a humane way. So organizing and providing community services and alternatives to criminalizing people seeking asylum is essential for our government to implement. So we will, for Tsuru For Solidarity, we will be organizing Japanese Americans who have the moral authority to speak about being children who were imprisoned. We will show up at these sites of shame to protest and speak out, to share our story, to let people know that what is being done is something that can negatively impact a child for the rest of their lives.
Is there a website you recommend?
Yes, our website, www.Tsuru For Solidarity, and Tsuru means crane. It's spelled Tsuru. And there we have, people can see all of our other hashtags.
All right, that's Dr. Satsuki Ina, born at Tule Lake Segregation Center, a maximum security concentration camp for Japanese Americans during World War II. We thank you so much for taking the time out and all the work you do. Very much inspirational.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care now.
Mm-hmm.